Hello, everyone. This is Greg Drebenstedt, editor-in-chief at Rider Magazine and your host for the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast. Our guest today is Alonzo Bodden. Alonzo has been a comedian for more than 20 years. His stand-up special, Heavy Lightweight, is available on Amazon Prime Video. He's a regular panelist on NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and he's done stand-up at clubs and festivals around North America. He's been a guest on late-night talk shows and had roles on TV shows and in movies. And best of all, he's a motorcycle enthusiast. Alonzo, welcome to the show.
How you doing, Greg? I do want to add one thing, or maybe
Sure.
correct or whatever. I don't just perform in North America, all over the world.
All over the world.
And
Okay,
the
great.
reason I bring that up is because I was in Sydney and I rented a bike and rode their equivalent of the Pacific Coast Highway, which was fantastic. And then I was doing a show called The Footy Show, which is kind of like their late night talk show.
Sure.
And a motorcycle dealer said, "Hey, if you mention me on the show, you can borrow any bike you want while you're here." So of course I mentioned them and had a number of rides through
Yeah,
Sydney. So yeah, international motorcycle rider and comedian.
awesome. So which came first, motorcycles or comedy?
Motorcycles,
Yeah.
motorcycles. I fell in love with bikes when I was 7 years old. A guy who rented land from my grandmother in South Carolina had a bike. And looking back, I'm guessing it was a Triumph or a BSA because
Okay.
it was the late 60s and I know it was British. But he took me for a ride. I fell in love with it and I still get that same feeling. It's been a lifelong passion. So yeah, bikes came first.
Right on. Right on. Well, my wife Carrie and I are big fans. Our mutual friend Peter Jones introduced us at Americade back in 2008, and you guys snuck us in the back door. That show was a lot of fun.
I love Americade. Christian who runs it got in touch with me through the internet and he said, "I just want to try this." So I went down. I'm thinking back now, it was probably what, 2013, I think was the first time I did it. I'm not sure. But anyway, I got up there and I just started. It was so fun to be amongst our tribe, right? So I could improv the show. And I started joking about the brand loyalties and the differences between the brands and all. I don't think I did any of my comedy material. I think the whole show was just talking about motorcycles and it was so much fun and such a good fit. I've been doing it since.
Well, yeah, when we saw you in 2018, I don't think there was anything that was scripted. It was just your interactions with the audience. And I mean, you really can't fake the funk. You've got to know what the difference between a Harley rider is or a Goldwing rider and know where the soft points are and where the jokes are. So that was great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really fun because everyone loves their bike, right? And
Yeah.
everyone thinks their bike's the best. But then you run into things that are beyond funny. And I will never forget. And I'm giving a shout out to the Wild Hogs of Milwaukee, a small group who showed up. Wild Hogs from Milwaukee. Not one of them had a Harley, and I was like, "You really don't understand how this works, do you?" I mean, that's the kind of thing that happens
Yeah.
that is a gem, and you can't write that. You can't plan for that. And since then, I think two hogs have gotten Indians, so at least they're, getting closer.
Well, speaking of that, I've seen on your Instagram feed that you've been riding one of those Indian Challengers. I know that you probably get access to be able to borrow some bikes, being an entertainer with a big following. So what are some of the cool bikes you've ridden?
I've ridden a bunch of things. So the Challenger, very fast for a bagger. I had a Chieftain a few years back, which was a great bike. And
Yeah.
even though I put the hot rod kit on it, it wasn't near as fast as the Challenger. The best way I describe the Challenger is it felt more like a motorcycle than a bagger. So riders I think understand what I'm saying there. But that was a very cool bike. Um, I got the Ducati Multistrada. They loaned me one last year. I've had a multi before. It's a phenomenal bike. It's a lot of fun. It's very Ducati, so
Absolutely.
it's an adventure bike that handles like a sport bike. And I asked them about the V4, and they said, "Yeah, you're not the only one waiting." So it'll be a while before I do that. Then, my personal bikes now, I'm riding BMWs and absolutely love them. I've had a GS since, let's see, my first GS was a 15, and I just got a new one last year, a 19. And then I had a K1600 GT back in 2015. That's a bike I rode cross country
Okay.
to Americade, and just last year I found this great deal on the K1600 America, the bagger
Oh,
with
the
the
Grand
trunk.
America with the trunk and everything.
Grand
Yeah.
America, yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm loving that bike, and my girl loves it. She's like, this. That's what prompted me to get it. She liked riding, and
Yeah.
she's great, but now she rides in comfort with something to lean on and a heated seat and a whole bit. But it's a phenomenal bike. So yeah, and BMW's, being a tall guy,
Yeah.
they're a little more comfortable for me, and I think my sport bike days are behind me, Greg.
I understand. Yeah, it's interesting because Carrie and I rode. We picked up a Grand K1600 Grand America from BMW's headquarters in New Jersey, and then we rode it up to Americade in 2018 when we saw your show. And that inline six is just a fantastic engine. It's so smooth and fast. And I had actually ridden the K1600B, which is the one without the trunk, cross country after that press launch in 2017. And yeah, to have a bike that with that much power and all the sophistication, they've got a lot of cool features on it and stuff. It's was a very sweet machine. And I'm 6 feet tall, so I'm not as probably as tall as you, but where you can stretch out a little bit, yeah, it makes a big difference. So yeah,
Yeah, I had a great experience with the bagger when it first came out. So they invited me and a couple other guys to pick up the K1600 bagger, and these were three prototypes. It was right before it was launched. They wanted us to go to Kansas City to the National Biker Roundup, right, and then ride them from there to Sturgis for Sturgis. So because they wanted to see what the Harley world thought of the bagger.
right.
So we go to the National Biker Roundup, and obviously, people at BMW had no idea what this was. I mean, these are the brothers with road glides. I was like, I don't think there are any road glides left. I think you guys bought all of them. Completely chromed out, beautiful, high power stereos, whatever. So we ride in, three of us on these BMW baggers, and they're looking at it, and the comments like, "That's pretty cool for a sport bike. That'd be a cool, fun second bike." And they did not see it. That crowd did not see it as a bagger. And one guy made a statement that I thought was so profound, because the bagger has everything, right? It has reverse, it has
Sure.
quick shifter, it has cruise control, all the modern stuff built in. And he said, yeah, all that stuff's cool, but you can't see technology,
Right
and
on.
and then the other thing that was funny. So it rained that night. We got there Friday. It rained, and this was at a campground, and obviously the campground turns to mud in the rain. We went back Saturday. Everyone was gone because they're not going to let their bikes get wet and dirty. And once
Right.
again,
Right. Right.
BMW doesn't understand that part of the bagger culture, which I love that stuff. I'm not one of them, but I love it, that
Sure.
their appreciation in their bikes. And then we rode to Sturgis, and it was kind of the same thing where they saw that bike, but not as a bagger. They saw it as a sport bike. They saw it as a high tech bike or this or that. We told the guys at BMW, look, if you want to do this again, you're going to have to put some wheels on these things, a stereo, and paint it so that they even recognize it.
There you go. There you go. Yeah, paint a V twin on the side. Yeah, I mean that. Like I said, that's the thing. Those motorcycles. I mean, it's based on the K1600 Sport Tour. I went to that press launch years ago and have been impressed with that engine ever since. It's just, BMW's put inline sixes in their cars for many years, and it offers so much performance and smoothness. And when you really get cranking on that bike, the way it sounds is fantastic. But it's just a very different experience from V twin. I mean, you've ridden, Harleys and Indians and so forth, and it's the sound and feel is as important as the look. And so, different bikes will appeal to different people, and you can't necessarily, like you said, baggers aren't interchangeable. A BMW is not interchangeable with a Road Glide or with an Indian or something like that. They're going to appeal to different people. So,
Yeah, I love all of them. I've had this talk with people because they'll ask me like, how come there aren't TV shows on motorcycles? And one of the things is, the regular world doesn't love bikes the way we do,
absolutely.
and they don't understand. Like I say, we're a small tribe. We don't need to subdivide into tribes where you have the sport bike guys who don't like the touring guys, who think the sport bike guys are squids, and the bagger guys who don't like the, I don't know, adventure bike or this, that. You're like we understand these categories, and what a lot of people in motorcycles don't understand is, to the world, it's just a motorcycle. And the only two brands that everyone recognizes, right, are Harley and Ducati.
Yeah.
Those are the two that people know what those are. So yeah, I ride everything, and I love, whatever you ride. I The debates as to what's better is always fun, but the fights are ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. Since I work for a magazine, I've had the good fortune to ride pretty much every kind of motorcycle there is, except for pretty much dirt bikes and race bikes. And, riding off road or riding long distances on the highway, or even I've been on racetracks, it's every experience is something different. You get something else out of it. And if I had to only do one kind of riding or ride only one kind of motorcycle, I would probably find it a little bit limiting. It's like people that play guitar that have 10 guitars. And it was like, why do you have 10 guitars? Why can't you just have one? But apparently it's like, well, if you have to ask the question, you don't understand. So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I will say, if I had to have one motorcycle, the BMW GS does everything.
I would actually have to agree with you. So Carrie and I have done tours in Europe. We did one in Ecuador. We've done them in a lot of different places. And our bike of choice is always the GS. She's actually finds it really comfortable. She's really spoiled and has enjoyed riding on the back of Gold Wings and, said that K1600 Grand America, but she finds the GS really comfortable. I find it really easy to handle in any kinds of roads, in the Alps or wherever. So if I'm riding it confidently, she feels comfortable on the back. And yeah, it pretty much is the universal motorcycle that can do just about anything. You can go fast, you can go off road, you can tour. Yeah, it's a fantastic bike. So
Yeah, and I love how it's created its own market, because it was one of those looks that only a mother could love, right? Like it was so ugly that it looked good.
sure.
And then it literally built a whole genre now where everybody's got to make one. But no, I don't. The multi is fantastic just because it's fast and handles so well. A friend of mine and I, we have this debate all the time because he's big Ducati guy, and I've had my share of ducks, but I got to say the GS just has a presence
Yeah.
about it that is unique, and I love that bike.
Sure, absolutely. So I was scrolling through your Instagram feed a little bit, looking at some of the bike posts, and looks like you got rid of a couple bikes recently. One of them was a Triumph Rocket 3. That thing's a beast.
I had the Rocket 3. That was the first one. That was from '05.
Wow.
So power cruisers I've always loved from
Yeah.
back when I was a kid riding sport bikes, and I went to the Honda dealer, who's a friend of mine. The guy's still a friend to this day. He had a Valkyrie, and he said I was riding a CBR 900, right? And he's like, "You got to ride this thing," and I'm like, "What the hell is it?" Because I'm maybe 30 years old or something, like I don't know how, but it was like this big bike. I took that thing around the block. Greg, I came back laughing. I was literally laughing, and I was like, I gotta have one of these. And a couple of years later, I bought the Valk. Just absolutely loved it, and then made the mistake of selling it. Regretted it. Went back 2 days later. They were like, "Oh, that thing's gone."
Yep.
So the Rune came out,
Oh,
and I
wow.
bought the Rune,
You
and
owned a
it's a
Rune.
great bike, but it was too much chrome. Greg, I
Yeah.
can't polish. You'd ride through a puddle, it's like, okay, you got 4 hours of polishing ahead. The Rocket 3 came out, and I was like, wow, this is the only bike to out Valkyrie the Valkyrie, right? It was bigger, it had more torque and everything else. And I kept that bike for 15 years until this year when the new Rocket came out.
Right. Even
I
bigger.
got the new Rocket and I said, oh, it'll be really cool to have both, right? To have the classic old one and a new one. I didn't ride that bike once from when I bought the new one. So I just said, time to make some room in the garage and
Sure.
sell it. And everyone who knows me, all my friends, they know I don't keep things long. If I keep something for 2 years, they're like, wow. And I had that Rocket for 15 years because there was nothing else like it, and nothing could replace it in my garage except another Rocket.
Yeah, it's interesting that Triumph committed to building that bike in the first place, and then that they've kept it in their lineup because they don't sell a lot of them, but there's a core following of people who really love it. And then they, obviously invested a lot into the newer version of it. And yeah, there's nothing quite like a Rocket 3. And just like you were saying with the Valkyrie, I mean, The Goldwing is a bike that I absolutely love. People have often portray it as the old man's bike, or it's a couch on wheels, or a Barca Lounger on wheels. But in the right hands, especially when they came out with the one in the GL 1800 in 2018, or excuse me, 2001. One of the engineers was a guy who had designed the CBR, and so it's got a great chassis. And you can embarrass some people on all kinds of motorcycles on a Goldwing in the right hands. I mean, you might be scraping the belly pan in a corner, but it's fast, it's smooth, it's comfortable, and you can have your wife and a teddy bear strapped to the trunk and having a blast. So yeah.
I'm a big fan of the Goldwing. Goldwing's a fantastic bike. The new Valkyrie. So when they went to the latest 1800, and they came out with that newer Valkyrie, that one it missed. It missed.
Yeah, it wasn't in the lineup for very long. That tells you
Yeah,
something.
it didn't have. One of the things about the Valkyrie was this giant chrome engine just hanging there like that. That was the centerpiece of the bike. This giant chrome six-cylinder engine, and with the new one, with it being covered and the radiators on the side and the plastic and this and that, it just didn't have the same impact. And I know all the Valkyrie people were like, no, just make the old one again. Like that was a bike that people were
Yep.
basically telling Honda, okay, don't change a thing, and they did. And I don't think the newer ones sold at all, but the Gold Wings are phenomenal.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny how some bikes will stay in lineups for many years. Like I had a KLR 650, and that stayed in Kawasaki's lineup for like 30 something years with hardly any changes. And then they finally had to drop it because it still had a carburetor and it wouldn't pass emissions. But, I mean, it was an affordable bike, and they kind of got the formula right the first time. And they're like, well, we'll just make a few tweaks and changes here and there. And then some bikes come out and it just doesn't find an audience, or these companies have different priorities and they're in the lineup for a couple of years, and then boom, it's gone. So um, yeah, so I was going to ask you about the cross country ride that you did to Americade. Is that the first time that you've ridden cross country? Did you go by yourself?
Yes, and yes, it was my first time across country, so it was a bucket list thing, right? I
Sure.
definitely wanted to do it, and it's one of the few experiences that exceeded my expectations. It was actually, well, you've done it and you probably do it,
Yeah.
have done it a few times, but for me, it was just incredible. And doing it by myself, it's not like the old days. It's not like wow, you went by yourself. It's like, yeah, well, I got a cell phone and a couple of credit cards. I think I'll survive.
Exactly.
It was such a great ride though. Seeing certain things, like it started. You know what I wanted to see? I wanted to see that US 50, the loneliest road in America,
Oh yeah,
across
across Nevada.
Nevada.
Yeah.
And then I looked and I was kind of like, I could just keep going on 50 all the way across the country. So I would jump between that and I-70, depending on where I was and where the weather was. But so many great experiences, and riding is sort of meditative for me. So it was just riding, going through the Midwest, seeing Greg. I don't know if you're aware of how much corn we have in the United States of America. Greg, we have a lot of corn,
We
and you
do.
measure corn in time, not in distance. You're just in my second day of corn, and there's nothing but corn in front of me, and then you hit Ohio, and you're like, oh my God, a tree.
Right,
Uh,
right. Yeah, riding across the Great Plains is different. It's interesting. I've driven across country a few times because I've moved around, but my first and only cross country motorcycle trip, and I guess it's a scheduling thing, I don't know, was at riding home from Asheville, North Carolina, when BMW introduced the K1600 bagger. I rode it home cross country, and I had never been to Kansas before, and I rode 500 miles across Kansas. And you're absolutely right. It was corn and silos, and I was happy to get to the Rockies. But I did the same thing. I was solo. Like when you can ride at your own pace, you can stop at your own pace. You can just, let your mind wander at your own pace. Because even if you have another rider, you're always kind of thinking like, oh, well, what are we going to do next? Where are we going to eat? You're thinking in relation to that other rider. And when you're by yourself, you can just ride as long as you want, or stop whenever you want. And I agree with the meditative aspect of riding, because it's really one of those things that obviously motorcyclists have been doing it forever, but you can't you shouldn't look at your cell phone while you're riding, and you can't check your email and do all those things. And it's a great break from all of that, and it gives you an excuse to just be off in your head and your thoughts, and looking at the scenery. And yeah, so it's nothing like it.
I've had a couple of companies that they've offered me the Bluetooth for in my helmet, a heads up display for my face shield, and the technology's great, but especially with the Bluetooth, I was like, the last thing I want to do is talk to anyone on the phone when I'm riding. I Now when I had the Indian, I had the Chieftain Elite, I think, and it had this crazy powerful stereo. I think it was like 600-watt speakers in the fairing, speakers in the bags, and I was that annoying guy at the light. The music was just pumping,
Right,
and
right.
that was really cool, and it was great for that bike. But like on my BMW, let's be honest, the stereo they come with isn't anything great. But I know people who put speakers in their helmets and this and that. I don't really want to hear music or anything else. I just like the ride, the road, that just experiencing it all around me. So, yeah, that's one area of technology that I have stayed away from, the sound systems. And the other thing, about doing it now, I mean, like, I'm not Bessie Stringfield. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Oh no, yeah,
You
absolutely,
know who
yeah.
I'm talking about. This black woman riding across country on a Harley in the 30s. My hero. This woman is amazing. So my adventures weren't that difficult. I was on a late model BMW, as I say, with a credit card in my pocket.
Right, right.
But it was still just a fantastic experience. And the people who tour and go through every small town and this and that, I get that too. I wish I had the time. I didn't have the time to do that, but I think anyone who does it, you have your own experience, right? And you get to see what you want to see. I want to do an iron butt. I've come close.
Ah,
The most I've done so far is an 800-mile day, and had I planned it and mapped it out and contacted them, I'm sure I could have done 1,000. But that's something on my bucket list. That's probably the next bucket list thing I want to do.
sure. Yeah, that's a big commitment. I've only done one of those myself. I had ridden on the Oregon Backcountry Discovery Route. This is off-road route through Oregon with a couple of buddies a number of years ago, and we ended up in Walla Walla, Washington, and I live in Ventura, California, and there's no shortcut between the two. Like, it's 1,000+ miles, no matter what route you take. And I had the weekend to get home. I had to be at work on Monday, and I was like, well, if I just do it all in one day on Saturday, I can take Sunday and recover. And I just got up super early, and I had filled out my paperwork. I actually thought I might do it, so I filled out my paperwork and got my receipts and all that. And yeah, put the hammer down. And most of that trip was on I-5. It was pretty boring. But again, I was on a BMW test bike, had a big tank. I was able to cover a lot of miles, and I was completely shattered by the end of it. And I probably wouldn't want to make a habit of it. There are some iron butt riders that do that stuff day after day, whether it's the rally or they just do it. That's their pastime, and that's great. But it's very demanding. It's a lot. And then, like I said, if you want to stop and see, a historic site or points of interest, that's not really in the cards for long, that iron butt riding. So
No, no, not for that schedule. And the ones who do that, I guess the full rally is what, 11,000 miles in 10 days?
yeah,
Amazing.
yeah,
But again, like you said, everyone has their own thing, right? So that's really cool. I mean, I've hung out with Ricky Gadsden, who, his world is 7 seconds at a time. Uh,
absolutely.
but watching him drag race a bike was art. It was comical how good he was. We were talking just like you and me are talking,
Right.
and we're over by his motorhome, and he said, "Hey, grab my helmet." And I grab his helmet, and they roll the bike over, and he's like, "Okay." And I just watched him stage the bike, smoke his back tire, get on the line, drop a 7 something quarter mile, take number one in qualifying,
Right.
take his helmet off, and we continued his conversation like it had never happened. I was like, "Are you insane? Are you really?" And I was like, "How demoralizing is that to the other guys that he's that good that he's like, be with you in 10 seconds and boom." So what were we talking about?
Right.
And again, so that's the other extreme. But yeah, riding, the whole experience is like that, man. Whatever you find that you love, the passion is equal, right? So that's really cool.
Right. Right. So, I know this whole pandemic thing's been a little bit weird, for the magazine. We don't travel as much. A lot of events have gotten canceled. It's been a little bit weird getting access to test bikes. I imagine as a comedian, you're not traveling as much. I mean, so what have you been doing to adapt? I mean, are you riding more? Are you riding less than you used to, or what?
It's been good and bad. Obviously, yeah, a lot of clubs are closed. Travel isn't happening. I'm not working as much. Fortunately, I'm okay, healthy, and the rent is paid, because I know that's not true for a lot of people.
Sure.
So initially, when the world shut down, motorcycles were the ultimate social distancing vehicle, right? You're by yourself, you're wearing a helmet, you're wearing gloves. This is last year, April and May. The roads in LA and the LA area were empty. And the biggest danger was people losing their minds in their cars, right? So some guy has a 1995 Camry, but he feels, well, I can do 100 miles an hour now. And it's like, no, you can't. You don't have brakes on that stupid thing, and so you had to watch out for that. But it was fantastic riding because the world like there was nobody out. Um,
Yeah,
but
there were a lot of those
as
folks.
things have picked up, there's more and more out there. I did one trip. I went to Tulsa. I was supposed to go across country to a BMW rally in North Carolina, and because work wasn't happening, I had the time. I said I'm going to ride across the country. A friend of mine in Oklahoma, she has a son. He's 7 years old, and I said, yeah, it's time for him to ride a motorcycle. It's time for him to go for a ride because that was the age I was. So I said, I'm riding across country. I'll stop in, and then the rally got canceled, obviously, and I said to her, you know what? I'll just come to Tulsa and take him for a ride. And I did. I went there. We rode around on Sunday. She said, okay, you've created another one. He hasn't taken his helmet off for 3 days.
Awesome.
So it
Awesome.
worked. So I've got to do a little bit of riding like that, but mostly it's I'm a commuting rider. I love commuting, and it makes everything easier. And then I do my day trips and day rides, around Southern California.
Sure. Well, I live just up the road from you in Ventura. And, whenever I've got to go to events, we're pretty fortunate here in California is that we can filter through traffic or lane split or whatever you want to call it. I mean, that is, common practice in Europe. And people think when you go to other states or whatever, they think it's weird, but it actually, that's really the only way you can get through LA traffic without losing your mind is being on a motorcycle. And it's you always feel like you're cheating a little bit. You go past Porsches or Lamborghinis or work trucks, and you're able to scoot through, and it's pretty nice. So what are some of your favorite areas do you go ride? I know you go up to the Rock Store and place like that, the Santa Monica Mountains and Malibu that LA is famous for. Where else do you like to ride?
Yeah, the Santa Monica Mountains and all the canyon roads, it's like my backyard. I tell people I'm so spoiled that riding is 15, 20 minutes from my house and some of the greatest roads in the world. Or you go on the other side and ride up the crest and all of that. But you know where I really love riding? I love the desert. I love when I can get out to Nevada. I've been through Utah. I haven't done the Grand Canyon, which is inexcusable, and I haven't done Death Valley, both in my backyard, and I should have done. But you know how it is. I'm gonna do it, and then you just don't. So I
Right.
want to do that. But the desert, I grew up in New York, in Queens, in New York City, and when I first saw the desert, it blew my mind as wow, this has been the same for millions of years. Like there is so much nothing out here. And I love it, especially, as crazy as it sounds, in summertime, it's 110, 112 during the day, but you hit that evening ride and it's 80 degrees, the sun's out, you smell this sage of the desert, and it just feels like you can go on forever. That is just such a beautiful ride. I've done that outside of Phoenix and past Palm Springs, and like I
Right.
say, going into Nevada. Arizona is probably my favorite for that kind of ride. But yeah, I love the desert. Beautiful.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I'm not from California either. I moved here from back east. I lived mostly in the South, and the first few times that I rode through the desert, certain parts of it, the Mojave, the Grand Canyon, Death Valley, it's just, it's wide open. It's got a different feel, and it's rocks and it's cactus, it's whatever. And especially in the springtime, it doesn't get a lot of rain, but if it does, there's wildflowers everywhere. So it's wide open. I mean, it's one of the really fortunate things about living in the Southwest is having not only mountains but desert, and there's just a wide variety of roads. And some, even though California is one of the most populous states in the country, there are huge sections of the state where there's nobody. You go to up along the eastern Sierra or something like that. You go into the northern part of the state, and there's hardly anybody. There's a lot more deer than there are people. So
Yeah, even closer. I tell people one of the things about the canyons is you're half hour, 45 minutes from LA, and you don't know that LA exists. And that is a great feeling. 2 years ago, is it two? Yeah, I think it's about 2 years ago. I rode the tail of the dragon. I finally did it. I was doing a rally, something in West Virginia. So I looked at it and I was said, "Oh, I can fly to Knoxville, rent a bike, do the." And I rode the tail of the dragon, and it was cool. But I have to say, it was kind of anticlimactic. And I told
sure.
people, I said, "It's great, but you have to understand. Like I live in Southern California, like I'm surrounded by phenomenal roads, and I get it. If say you're in the Northeast, you've never been on a road like that. It's amazing. But when when Mulholland Drive and Latigo Canyon are in your backyard, it kind of takes away from that. Although the Southeast, the green of the Southeast is just so beautiful to ride through. And again, all of these, it's all experiences, right? I mean,
Right.
I did Lower Wacker Drive around Chicago with a Chicago rider who showed me like, yeah, this is where we rip, and it was like, wow, And I did the same thing in Seattle with a group of guys. They call themselves the Cretans, and they ride these cafe bikes from like the '70s, like '70s Japanese cafe bikes, and they're insane. By the way, if you ever encounter them,
Okay.
these guys are insane how they ride these bikes. I don't know if you remember bikes from the '70s, but they didn't have things like brakes. Like
Right. Right. Everything was made of wood, felt like. So, yeah,
but
it's funny. I
it's all
started
these.
riding in when I lived in Philadelphia, and it was my way to actually escape from the city. But unlike LA, it's similar in New York. You have to ride a ways to get out of the city. There's so much outlying suburbs, but I would go ride in the Amish country, the farms of Lancaster County or something to get out of the city. But I've ridden through New York City and other major cities, and it's its own experience. You were talking about the pandemic. I did a photo shoot in Los Angeles in downtown LA right before Christmas, and because of the shutdown, most of the museums were closed. So Grand Avenue was completely, there was hardly anybody on the sidewalk. There were hardly any vehicles on the streets. And we did this photo shoot. Normally you'd have to be dodging buses and people and so forth, but we had it basically to ourselves. It was a really interesting experience that'll probably never repeat because it was just, that's just not what cities are normally like. So
Yeah, those kind of rides are, some of these pandemic rides have been great. And it's almost like the cities have an apocalyptic look about them, right? When you
sure.
go out, because there's no one on the streets. And that is kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, Alonzo, it's been great chatting with you. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? You got any shows coming up or anything else?
Well, the rallies are supposed to happen. Americade hopefully will happen in September.
Absolutely.
The BMW rally and the MOA rally in North Carolina is supposed to be in September. I mean, we're all waiting for the world to open and
Sure.
to see what's what and what we're going to do. So I'll be out there as best I can. It is still, like I said, I fell in love with it at 7 years old. I still love it today. I mean, I have a Grom because when I was a kid, my dad wouldn't let me get a mini bike. And the Grom came out, and Honda invited me to ride it. And I was like, I'm getting one of these. So now I even have a mini bike. So when people ask me how many bikes I have, it's three and a half. I have three and a
Three and a
half
half. Yeah.
bikes.
Right on. Right on. Well, before we sign off, tell some of our listeners how to find you. Where should they look for
I'll,
you?
You can find everything I do at alonzobodden.com, ALONZOBODDEN.com, or my Instagram is so funny. The reason that Instagram's different is somebody took my name on Instagram and they thought I was going to buy it from them, and I was like, nah, I'll just do something different.
Good
But
for you.
yeah, and we were going to go, as I love MotoGP. Unfortunately, Austin's been canceled, so I guess like everything else in the world, right? We're waiting for what happens, but we'll still be riding. Stay safe out there, have fun, and let's all remember we're all riding, no matter what kind of bike. Again, we fight amongst ourselves. Let's stop it.
That's great. I agree. Well, hey, since I'm just up the road, maybe we can get together for a ride sometime. We'll include your information, your website in the show notes and stuff. But really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank
All
you.
right. For the Rider Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstedt. Thanks for listening and keep the rubber side down.